Welcome back to the Moonlit Circle. If you're new here, I'm Gwendie Belle Moone, author, storyteller, and celestial traveler. Tonight, we are going on a trip, a real one, across oceans, across time zones, across body image, shame stories, tiny airplane bathrooms, and old belief that I held that I had to shrink to belong. Tonight's episode is about what it was like for me to travel abroad in a fat body and the stories that I told myself before I even left and the realities I faced along the way, and even the unexpected moments of liberation that shaped the next phase of my metamorphosis. First of all, a huge thanks to my brother and his husband for letting me come with. It was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I'm forever grateful for that. But for you, my Moonlit Circle, I'll share with you what some of the major complaints about each city are in general. What's the consensus out there with larger body travelers? And then I'll share with you what my personal experience was in each of these cities. So buckle up. By the light of the silvery moon, I want to till my honey I'll Okay, so before the trip ever really began, I made a decision, a really big one. I delayed my surgery. I could have had my surgery a couple of weeks before going to Europe. I wasn't second guessing the procedure at that point, or doubting the path of the metamorphosis. I still very much wanted to do it, but because I wanted to travel without having to worry about recovery restrictions, dietary adjustments, or whether I'd be, the weak link in a tour, I wanted to walk and eat and explore without boundaries or limitations, seeing as how it's quite likely my only trip to Europe that I'll ever take. So I wanted to do all of that and experience all of that without my body being on, the operating table or on the mend. And, it felt like reclaiming one last round of freedom before stepping into a new, more restrictive chapter. And I'm glad I did it that way. Not only because I think that I had more fun, I was able to experience more. Having looked back at my initial post-op recovery, I'm really glad that I decided to hold off on surgery to take this trip, because I did have some post-op complications that could have happened, in Europe, and that would not have been fun for anyone. So I went prior to my gastric sleeve, and I'm glad I did that. Because I'm guilty of following like every single body positivity influencer under the sun, I was at least equipped with some basic knowledge about what I would encounter traveling abroad fat. And I've actually, done a lot of traveling at 300 plus pounds within the States. So I didn't think this would be too much different. But there are some staple facts that you have to know as a fat girl if you're going to be traveling abroad. Traveling of any kind, number one, airplane seats are just not built for human bodies. Seats are getting smaller and smaller, especially for long haul flights. Armrests really dig into your hips and thighs, and can't be raised during takeoff or landing. Seat belts frequently don't fit. triggering shame or panic if you have to ask for an extender. Try getting, try to subtly get a flight attendant's attention to ask for a seatbelt extender. There's no subtlety there whatsoever. The lack of accessible seating options makes the beginning of the trip itself feel like a test. So just getting on the airplane is quite the adventure. And then, of course, there's judgment from other passengers, side eye when walking down the aisle as if everyone's really praying that you don't sit next to them. I know we've all had those moments, especially on Southwest, where you just sort of sit wherever. Visible irritation from seatmates if any part of you touches them. If they don't know you, they don't want you to touch them. And I get it. People can sigh or shift aggressively or lean away. It's pretty obvious what they're doing. And so you end up having a lot of internalized pressure to make yourself smaller the entire flight. And let me tell you how uncomfortable that gets when you're in the middle seat next to two strangers and you're spilling into both seats. That's quite uncomfortable. Been there, done that. But then there's, it gets even worse, and we haven't even made it off the plane yet. And again, these are just general experiences of people who live in larger bodies. The tray table and snack discomfort, because tray tables don't necessarily lower fully because your stomach or your chest could be in the way. There's difficulty, if that's the case, in opening snacks and reaching for things or putting things under your seat, to bend over to put something under your seat. God forbid you drop something. You're not going to get it till after the flight. And eating comfortably with the tray down just doesn't happen for a lot of folks. The drinks or snacks can slide on the table if the table's not fully stabilized, because a lot of times it will sit on top of a larger person's belly or chest, and it won't come down all the way. Bathroom access. Woo! So bathroom access is nearly impossible. Regular airplane bathrooms are notoriously tiny, and long haul flights obviously make that worse. You can negotiate your bladder through a 3-hour flight, but 13 hours across the pond is a little different. Many fat women avoid drinking water on longer flights just to avoid using the bathroom, which can cause, issues, dehydration, swelling, or headaches. I mean, it's not a great method to prevent yourself from having to use a bathroom that you're likely not going to fit in, but I get the sentiment. And navigating the super narrow aisles can also be difficult, especially with carts or other passengers blocking the way. And so just getting up to the bathroom can be an adventure. And the armrests, if you're anywhere close to the BMI that I was, the armrests are not your friend. They bruise and give you body pains, and 12 hours with an armrest pressing into your hips and your ribs, or your arms, actually leaves bruising. And pressure points can make it impossible to rest or sleep deeply on a longer flight. Crossing your legs or repositioning is often not an option for larger body folks. So it can be a quite uncomfortable experience. And then, of course, I kind of mentioned this already, but there's the anxiety of spilling over into another seat. And boy, does that happen. I mean, the seats barely contain an average sized body. And so there's always some level of spillage. And this is one of the most universal experiences for, anybody who's even slightly overweight. It's, hyper awareness of shoulder or thigh space, who should put their elbow on the armrest, trying not to move so much, feeling like you owe your seatmate stillness that you physically can't maintain. Trying desperately to hold muscles tight so that you don't accidentally touch someone. And, carrying shame that shouldn't be yours to carry. And so it can be quite the mental load just to sit there. And the longer the flight, the worse it gets. And then, even in the airport, long security lines and body scanner experiences can be, before you even get to the plane, it can be interesting. And body scanners tend to flag heated areas, and let's talk about that, because what is one thing that's a hot box 24/7? The groin of a morbidly overweight person. And so it feels like every time you go to the airport, you're going to get patted down. TSA agents occasionally can make insensitive comments or act impatiently. And there's the emotional labor of being just really hyper visible in a crowded line. Let's say that bending over is not your you're definitely not entering the Olympics for bending over, and you've got to take your shoes off to get through that line, and it's quite an experience for you. Maybe you forgot to wear easy to slip on, easy to slip off shoes, and you tied them, or now you have to untie them, or there's buckles or zippers, and by the time you get your shoes off, you could already be experiencing hyper awareness of your own body size in that environment, even though realistically nobody else is paying attention to you. These are the moments that get in your head and you think people are looking at you. So no amount of, looking at the evidence is going to change that, because you feel that in your head. There's also traveling. It can give you a lack of accessible comfort items, like, an airline blanket is too small to cover your whole body. Seat pillows are too flimsy to support larger necks or torso shapes. Compression socks, if needed, aren't always sized inclusively. So those little, airline and travel comfort items that are sometimes offered, definitely not keeping a larger bodied person in mind. And then, of course, at the gate, there can be some hijinks there, too. There are situations where larger bodied people have been asked to check carry-ons because staff assume that fat passengers are going to need help, or they're going to take longer. And so when they see morbidly obese people, they will approach them and ask them to check their bags to make it easier to get everyone on and off the plane. Strangers still to this day will stroll up to you. The more people you are around, the more likely this will happen. But strangers will offer unsolicited advice on weight or diet, or how to pick your seat on an airplane. Now that's pretty rare, but there are a lot of people who will just openly have a discussion about that sort of thing, making you even more hyper aware of your body in that situation. And gate agents assume that you might need, just like they might ask you to check your carry-ons, they may assume that you need special assistance without asking. So, they've, and you have to understand that airlines have had a lot of, they've had a lot of, I guess, publicity, bad publicity around the larger bodied people having accessibility at airlines and on airplanes. And so this is something that everybody's hyper aware of right now. And so, anytime in the current climate, social climate that we have, that you are at an airport, people are sizing you up. Absolutely. And then with, traveling abroad, and this is something that we'll talk about when we get to the individual cities that I visited, but fat phobia can be much more pronounced internationally. And many fat women report, more overt staring abroad, drivers who refuse to take them. That happened to me. Social workers or service workers who speak to a thinner companion instead that they will avoid you as if you've got a disability and speak to someone who is more normal sized in the party. Restaurant seating isn't designed for larger bodies in most of Europe, and also being treated as an inconvenience or a spectacle. These are all definitely real things that happen internationally, but these are general rules, and they can vary from one country to the next, and even one city to the next. But Europe's overall urban spaces are often physically tighter and smaller and socially less body positive than major US cities. And so that's a real consideration that you have to take. And what I'm listing out here, all of those general rules that larger bodied people need to live by in order to travel and to travel abroad. These aren't just complaints. They're truly micro traumas that build up until traveling becomes a psychological, emotional, and physical gauntlet that you have to either throw down or pick up. And yet, fat women still travel, still explore. I did. They still take up space across continents. And so now that I've tortured you with what, issues could arise based on what the general consensus has to say about it, now I'll tell you what really happened to me. Let's start with the flight. It was a 13-hour haul on British Airways, straight across the Atlantic. That was from California, and I believe we did a pit stop in New York and then over the Atlantic, but I could be wrong in that. And I had the opportunity to be in business class, and it was a lovely business class. They had it all: space, seatbelt that fit, bathroom that I could turn around in that also had a window in it. It was, I could have done jumping jacks in that bathroom. A private lounge where no one stared like I didn't belong. It was really the first time travel didn't begin with bracing for humiliation for me as a larger woman. I was praying silently that I wasn't going to need a belt extender. And I didn't. I didn't need that. I didn't have to pretend that I didn't see any side eyes from strangers who wished for a smaller seatmate because I was in business class. I had my own little cubicle. I felt human, worthy. And that was how I began and ended the trip was like that. And I felt like someone who could take up space without apologizing for it. It was rather nice. It was rather lovely. And, and you too can have this and more, for the price of a business or first class upgrade. So I think what I learned from that was that if you're wealthy, the powers that be will definitely ensure your comfort regardless of your size. So I feel very blessed and privileged to have gotten that experience in business class, but it could have been a very different start of the journey for me had that not been the case. So our first stop was in Paris, and now remember how I said all countries vary on their level of fat phobia. So some of the general, fat girls traveling consensus about Paris are that, the biggest thing is that fat phobia is not subtle in Paris. There's no attempt to hide almost disdain for for people who are overweight. Paris is known for fashion and elegance and sometimes an icy demeanor, but for fat travelers, it's pretty much open disdain. Common experiences are that taxi drivers will refuse service or audibly complain about your size as you're getting into their car. Store employees will ignore or side eye plus size shoppers. People staring at bodies that don't fit the ultra thin Paris aesthetic. And people will gawk in Paris. They will absolutely just stare. Servers automatically asking if you want a small portion or making comments about what you order. It can happen in Paris. That did not happen to me personally, but that is something that women commonly report. Many women describe it as polite hostility. So, beautiful city, cold energy. But that's not where it stops. Clothing stores often offer almost zero plus size options. Paris fashion is world famous, but definitely not world inclusive. Most of their boutiques carry sizes up to like a US 10 or a 12. Plus size sections are pretty much non-existent in Paris. And so sales associates assume that when you walk into a boutique that you're just browsing because nothing fits. It is easy to feel invisible in the city, especially I can't even imagine being a larger bodied person living there. It's one of the top reasons. The shopping experience is one of the top reasons that fat travelers avoid shopping in Paris entirely. But there's more. But wait, there's more. In Paris, there's often really tight seating in all the restaurants. We did experience this at one dinner, and it was uncomfortable to say the least. Paris has a dining culture with very small spaces, tiny tables, close quarters. Paris was built for a much smaller frame, and much of that is still there. And people kind of make do with their smaller spaces however they can. And if you have a very popular cafe and only this much room to seat people, you're going to put those tables as close together as possible, because in Paris, fat is the exception to the rule. It is not the standard. So I can kind of understand where that came from, but it certainly did cause some situations. And fat women report, when they travel to Paris, that chairs with arms dig into their hips. Cafe seating is very close together and you can barely move. That's true. Narrow walkways between tables, also true. Servers trying to seat you in the least visible spot. And that did happen a couple of times. And it creates a constant feeling of disruption, like your body is a problem, for the furniture. And speaking of, it kind of is because the furniture is not made for larger people in Paris. But beyond that, Paris has a lot to offer, but it's a very walkable city, not a very drivable city. It is in some areas, but walking is how most people get around. And Paris is nothing but this mesh of stairs, tall, narrow stairs, steep hills, and cobblestones, and it can be brutal. So endless staircases just everywhere, like a surprise staircase around every corner. Uneven cobblestone is kind of an issue, and with the amount of walking that we did, there was quite a bit of knee pain, difficulty keeping up with groups, needing more breaks, feeling judged for stopping, those kinds of things. So, and transportation in general can be embarrassing in Paris, as reported by larger travelers, because taxis and ride shares and even buses can be a recurring source of stress, with common complaints being that drivers will refuse larger groups or larger bodies. You can get eye rolls, sighs, muttered comments. Again, they're not shy about it, about the judgy McJudgersons. Tiny back seats with zero leg or hip room. And public transit really crowds a lot of bodies pressed together. So that's not much better, even though it's more space. A lot of fat women say that Paris is really the only place they've traveled where they felt actively unwelcome in transit. So it can be disturbing if you're emotionally sensitive to that, to go to Paris. Paris is gorgeous. Let me start there. Paris is absolutely gorgeous, and I do encourage everyone to go see it. But the relationship fat women have with the city is complicated, and it's not the romance movies promised us. Paris was, for me, it was really a revelation because, I walked over 10,000 steps a day. So while I was there, I could eat anything: croissants, pastries, chocolate, French onion soup. I mean, you name it. Different cheeses, and my body burned through all of it. And it was really the first time in a long time that I wasn't negotiating with my plate or bargaining with myself in secret on what I could eat. So that I was super blessed in that area. And again, because I hadn't had the surgery yet, there were no restrictions. And so I got to try quite a bit of stuff. And then we really worked it off, for the most part on a day-to-day basis, just walking around. But there were also some not so magical parts about Paris for me. The drivers. Let me tell you, we'd wave down a taxi and the drivers looked at us like we were trying to ruin their day on purpose. One refused to let us in his car, and another one threw an actual tantrum, then took us anyway, muttering the entire time. But, the drivers were a reminder that Europe has its own flavor of fat phobia. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, there was the night at the opera. This was the moment that we became those people. We ended up leaving early because someone in the party wasn't feeling well. And so we started shuffling our way out as a group of four, making a little bit of noise. And the opera house the steps were so steep that it was, I was having to steady myself and steady other people making our way out of there without falling. And so we ended up disrupting a room full of people who treat opera like religion there. And so I could feel that judgment radiating from every corner of the room. But, I also realized after that moment that, my body is allowed to be here. And my needs are allowed to interrupt someone else's fantasy. We had to leave for a reason, and we were allowed to do that. So I don't owe perfect silence to be worthy of joy. It was unfortunate that we ended up missing the opera, but based on how extremely boring the first like 20 minutes was, I don't think I'm going to miss that, for my whole life. I'm not going to be on my deathbed crying about the opera in Paris that I missed. So, next was Amsterdam. We ended up going to Amsterdam next, and it was actually a bit more accessible and friendly, but not without issues entirely. Some of the common complaints about Amsterdam include, and this is, just a general consensus, is that people complain about bikes everywhere, and pedestrians are second-class citizens. And so if you're traveling in a larger body, you can feel a little bit anxious about accidentally stepping into a bike lane. Like, that's how prominent bikes are there. Cyclists kind of zipping by inches away without slowing, and they go fast. Navigating sidewalks that are just wide enough for one person with these bikes, and needing to move quickly to avoid oncoming bike traffic. And so if you're not fast or agile, it can feel very stressful and even be dangerous. So yes, those bikes. And for anyone who's been to San Francisco, they've got nothing on the bike issue in Amsterdam. So just throwing that out there. But Amsterdam also had very steep, narrow stairs, even in public places. Close to the close to where everybody uses ladders, basically, as staircases. They are definitely a character building experience. A lot of travelers have complained about extremely steep vertical stairs in hotels, apartments, and cafes. And it's just the common theme there. They do complain that they feel more like ladders than actual steps, and they're narrow stairwells as well. So there's little to no room for maneuvering, and most of the older buildings don't have elevators, so there's a lot of stair navigation. For bigger travelers with knee pain or mobility struggles, this can be a major barrier. But there's also an issue with non-inclusive public seating. Across the city of Amsterdam, you'll find really narrow benches with arms, so you can only be a certain size to get in. Cafe seats are also really narrow with arms, tight, closely spaced tables, just like in Paris. And they've got quite a food scene in Amsterdam, and so all of the fare is very, very tight, closely spaced seating. And low, soft seating. They also enjoy their little lounge chairs for patio entertainment and things of that nature. And those soft, low seats can be very difficult to get out of. Many fat tourists to Amsterdam note that the seating isn't hostile. It's just not designed with larger bodies in mind. So that's something to keep in mind. And public transit is accessible, but it's very crowded. I was actually pretty thrilled with the public transit in Amsterdam. The buses and the trams are very easy to use, but they're usually packed, and I mean packed. So, common complaints are that you can feel squeezed in like a tuna can during rush hours. There's limited standing space. There's very narrow aisles, and there's stress about balance and movement when the tram jerks, because it's not a soft ride. And just like in Paris, clothing stores aren't really plus size friendly. Amsterdam is also pretty fashion forward, but also not very inclusive. And fat travelers have reported things like, very few stores carrying extended sizes, limited options in mainstream shops for sure. And of course, salespeople who think that you're just browsing because you're not going to fit anything. So there's a general lack of, trendy size inclusive fashion. What they do have tends to be, potato bags. So, many fat travelers say that Amsterdam isn't overtly fat phobic, and I would agree with that. But locals have a very active, fit, outdoorsy aesthetic. Bodies outside that norm stand out more in Amsterdam. And I mean, you can spot a traveler by basically, are they carrying 10 extra pounds? And you feel more visible because of that, even if no one says anything. So it's a subtle discomfort rather than, an overtly hostile one. But personally, Amsterdam really surprised me. Buses everywhere, and transportation actually worked. I didn't find that it was too crowded. It could have been where we were and how we moved about, but I felt that it was rather nice. And it was a city built for movement and built for people without cars. And so we walked and we explored, and we breathed a little easier in Amsterdam. We did pass by the red light district, but we didn't go in. So, some curiosities can stay curiosities. We don't need that in our lives. But one day while we were in Amsterdam, we did take a day trip to Brussels, and it was very interesting. Brussels is a must for those beer connoisseurs out there. But some common issues with navigating Brussels as a fat person includes, number one is those cobblestones. Oh my God. So Paris had cobblestones, Amsterdam a little bit as well, but the cobblestones in Brussels, I don't know. Like so uneven. It's full of uneven cobblestone streets, and I didn't see a lot of cars, so there's a lot of walking. There's certainly no even sidewalks, so basically you're just walking on these uneven cobblestone streets all day long, and it is, people report knee pain, obviously, from the constant impact and the difficulty keeping pace. And there's a lot of walking tours in Brussels, and so from day to day, there's just these groups of people walking around, and it can be difficult to keep pace with, folks who tend to be walking on a pretty regular basis and walking much faster. If you are at risk of rolling your ankle, you're gonna do it in Brussels. So, wear some braces or what have you. But you can definitely start feeling exhausted way earlier than expected, just because of the additional impact to just the walking around. People imagine Brussels as flat and easy, but the old city terrain really says otherwise. So if you're going to travel to Brussels, please keep that in mind. And again, walking tours move very quickly. It's one of those cities where every tour guide seems to think the group is trained for the Olympics. mine did. He wasn't trained for the Olympics, but he did let us know that he was born and raised in the red light district, and he says that they're full of good folks over there. So we still did not need to visit that. But some common complaints about the walking tours are that, guides set a pretty brisk pace, and give little time for you to catch your breath when they stop. It's usually go, 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 show you all the points in the city, and then let you spend the rest of the day exploring on your own. That's how they tend to do it. So they do it pretty quickly, and tour guides don't wait for slow walkers, because the idea is to show you the highlights and then let you go explore. They want to get that part done as quickly as possible. And so you can feel singled out or embarrassed for falling behind. This aligns perfectly with our day trip experience. And it's extremely common. So I would just recommend making sure that you get a tour guide that does give you that space to explore on your own. And that way you don't feel so pressured to keep up with the group. You don't necessarily have to find all the places that they went to look for. You can do your sightseeing on your own. Also a common theme in Europe, seating at cafes is tight and uncomfortable, and it definitely was. Not as bad as Paris. Paris was the tightest, but like many European capitals, Brussels cafes and restaurants are not really size inclusive. Women often mention very small bistro chairs with rigid arms, narrow spaces between tables, tight indoor layouts. That one's true. They just squeeze in as much as they can for the tourists. And outdoor seating that wobbles or feels unstable on the cobblestones. Also true. That was a harrowing experience to sit outside in a cafe. Comfort becomes a negotiation rather than a given in situations like that. That's where those dreaded thoughts of, is the chair going to hold, start creeping in as you are sitting down. Public transit is reportedly very crowded and narrow. However, I took a tour bus, so I didn't get to experience that. But apparently there's very limited standing room and narrow bus seating, and rush hour can be pretty bad. I imagine with the tourist, being a tourist destination, that is true. And then also clothing options are limited, although most people don't really go to Brussels for their fashion, but they're not particularly plus size friendly anyway. Fat travelers have reported, few stores carry anything above like a US size 14 to 16, which is a little bit better than Paris, but still. Boutique sizing stops well before the plus size range, and of course, sales associates will often direct larger customers to look at the accessories instead of the clothing. So what Brussels is famous for is lace. They actually make a lot of lace and lace designs, and there was quite a few of those shops available. Also pretty famous for chocolate, but I did get a chance to take a bit of their food in, and something that they are most famous for is mussels, fries, waffles, and beer. And so it's kind of funny because the thing that people notice about Brussels is that the food portions, which are massive, they're like American-sized food portions. The food portions don't necessarily match the seating arrangements, because you've got these tiny little rickety, cafe tables and chairs, and then you've got food made for giants, and these tiny little chairs made for elves. So it's kind of poetic, a little bit of a contradiction with Brussels there. So, for me, Brussels was very charming until it wasn't. Like I said, we went on a walking tour and I fell behind. Not dramatically, but just enough to feel like the slowest person in the group. So enough to remember really every gym class humiliation of my childhood. Just enough. And then someone pointed out mussels and beer, and baby, we recovered very quickly. The strongest beer I ever tasted. I just had one glass and I was drunk, not buzzed, drunk. So it's no wonder that our tour guide said, he said this as everybody was deboarding the bus when we got there. He said, if you get too drunk, you're not getting back on my bus. So he said some of the boys from England would come over and drink too much because Brussels has such strong beer, and they would get kicked off of their day tour because of that. So, fun fact, most Brussels beer is brewed on site and served from tap rooms, and that's pretty cool. I had a steaming pot of the best mussels I ever tasted. I did get to try the French fries. They were French fries, and a waffle. I did get a waffle that made me believe in higher powers. I mean, that waffle. I to this day remember the waffle, and I just got a plain Belgian waffle, and it was the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. So, again, very, very thankful that I decided not to do my surgery prior to this trip so that I could experience everything. So that was our day trip to Brussels while we were in Amsterdam. And then we finally flew to London, where I found a really kind of a different kind of unexpected experience. The general consensus about London travel for fat girls includes complaints about the tube. It's their underground transport system, that it's not built for larger bodies. I personally did not see that or experience the tube lines, so I'm not sure. I don't have any commentation on that, but same as the airplanes, it's my understanding that it's narrow seats, armrests and hard dividers, standing room only with jerky movements, and extremely tight aisles. So it can feel even worse when there's the rush hour crowd. So the tube is iconic, but not not made for comfort. So we skipped that entirely. Now, London is it is an old city. And so the buildings are old, and that equals tiny spaces. So, even though London is a cosmopolitan area, the city is very old. And so hotel rooms are small, bathrooms are miniature, and, tiny little narrow showers that it's hard to maneuver around in. Staircases can be super tight and steep, and doorways in historical buildings especially can be surprisingly narrow. Many fat travelers describe London hotels as beautiful little shoeboxes. So I can see why. Restaurants and pubs also aren't size inclusive, again, mostly because they're older buildings and they just weren't designed for larger bodies. So, even like the booth tables can be very narrow, or the benches can be very narrow, or have fixed tables so that you can't move the bench back. And they're usually packed. The pubs are very popular in London, and so they're typically like packed, and it's standing room only anyway. And there have been some complaints about how some hosts at particular restaurants do try to seat fat guests where they're less visible. And then public transportation on top of the tube, on the London streets itself can be very, very crowded. It's just a crowded town. But they've got the double-deckers buses. Oh, I don't know if y'all have ever been on a double-decker bus, but that little staircase that leads up to the top, that is the smallest, tightest aisleway you will ever see. So good luck. I hope you're not, carrying a bag, because that was a very tight area. There's constant crowding at transit hubs. People are always just kind of milling about, waiting on their bus or their, to get on the tube. But there's stress about bumping into other people, and of course there's fat phobic stares in public transport crowds, and it feels like commuters in London don't necessarily want their personal bubble disturbed, and so it's not that there's hostility, but there's relentless closeness of everyone to everyone, and just trying to maintain your personal space. Now, London's not as bad in the clothing department as Paris. Some of the fashionable shops even carry sizes, U.S. sizes upwards of 12 to 14. But most brands offer plus size only online from London stores. Sales staff will, suggest customers try accessories instead. So London can be a fashion capital. I actually have a fashion story from London, but just not for all bodies. And, fat travelers often notice that British politeness isn't always kindness, that people don't necessarily say things overtly rude in London, but you can feel the discomfort in their silence, posture, or microaggressions. One woman described it like, they won't insult you, they'll just hope you disappear. So being in a larger body in London is seen as kind of an annoyance for Londoners. So it's not, it's not cruelty, it's avoidance wrapped in politeness. So for me, London was its own adventure. The food was very interesting. I think the thing they do in London is Indian cuisine, because to try and find what are some things that are traditional here to eat, I was met with a traditional English breakfast with blood pudding. That is a rite of passage I only needed once, and I will never need that again. So London was also where I bought my only designer bag I've ever owned. I'll take a picture of it and show it here. Not because of the brand, but because it felt like claiming a version of myself who no longer waited for permission to have nice things. So here she is. I'll put her right here. Her name is Ethel, and she's a Harrods patent leather medium tote from, I believe, the spring line of 2021, but I may not have that year right. But I honestly don't have any complaints about London. The taxis were easy. Everything I encountered was accessible. No one was rude. It was lovely, and I got to see the changing of the guard. But after 2 weeks of traveling Europe, by this point, we were certainly beat and ready to go back home. So, reflecting back on that, traveling at over 300 pounds really taught me a few things that a mirror never could have. It's how people look at you, how you look back at them, how your body negotiates terrain, expectations, and shame, how you learn to exist anyway. I didn't lose any weight on this trip because I was eating as much as I was burning off. But I didn't magically transform during that trip, but I did start to see myself differently. I did start to see myself as capable. I had never tried to walk 10,000 steps every single day, but I'll be damned, I was going to see everything that there was to see in these towns that we were visiting. So I pushed myself, and I found a level of capability and resilience that I didn't know I had. And that in turn made me feel like I deserve joy in any size. Traveling didn't shrink me, it expanded me. And so if you're living in a larger body and you're on the fence about travel, I'm here to tell you, do it. Get out there. It's worth a handful of uncomfortable moments to expand your world and see what's out there. You deserve it. So here's kind of a little teaching moment that I would like for my Moonlit Circle to know. Number one, your body is allowed to take up space in seats, in lines, in photos, in memories. Take up space. Number two, discomfort doesn't mean you don't belong. It means you're expanding. You are experiencing something new. So embrace that discomfort. Number three, joy counts just as much when you're out of breath. So walk those cobblestone paths. And who cares if you keep up with the group? You're on an adventure. Number four, let the world meet the body you have today, not the one you're waiting to earn. Love yourself for who you are today, and the rest will come. And number five, travel anyway. Do it for you. Anywhere, everywhere, especially the places you think aren't meant for you. You'll be accommodated, or you won't, and you can move on. But those moments, those potential embarrassing moments that prevent you from doing things, don't let that lead. Don't let that sensation be in the driver's seat. So I hope you all have learned something today, and I hope that your travels are as amazing and insightful as mine were. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to be part of this glowing little corner of the internet. And now, my sweet Moonlit Circle, keep dreaming, keep wondering, and keep glowing. Gwendie out.